Okay, welcome. My name is Wolf Gruner. I'm the director of the USC Shoah Foundation Center for Advanced Genocide Research. And it's my pleasure to introduce Gabor Toth, who's our fellow. But before I do this, I just want to say our next event, because we usually forget this, is on Thursday with Marion Kaplan at 11 o'clock on gender, and next Thursday, not this Thursday, next Thursday, April 11, on gender and the Holocaust. So Gabor Toth is the 2018-2019 Center Postdoctoral Research Fellow, which was awarded to an outstanding scholar to advance digital genocide research through the use of the Testimonies of the Visual History Archive. And this is a first, it's kind of a premiere, the first time that we have a fellow really focusing on digital humanities, digital genocide studies. The fellowship is founded by the Visual History Archive program, the program which is kind of overhauling the whole visual history archive and kind of modeling it for the future to make better access for scholars and students to use the testimonies for research and teaching. Gabor Toth is got his BA in Italian literature and language from the Erdős Lawrence Science University in Budapest. He got an MA in medieval studies from Central European University in Budapest, and then he got a PhD in history at the University of Oxford. And here you might kind of stop and think, Holocaust studies and medieval history. He might explain this probably better than I ever could. But he is kind of a or kind of encyclopedic person in the best way possible, I have to say. And his research focus on very different things like computational linguistics, text and data mining for humanities research, and the study of human cognition using historical documents. He was receiving many awards, including the 2015 Visiting Fellowship at the University of Oxford Center of Humanities, 2016 Gerda Henkel Fellowship in Digital History at the German Historical Institute in Washington, D.C. He has also worked as an assistant professor at the university in Germany from 2013 to 2018. He published on these different fields of study, for example, using culture, Giovanni Russelli's knowledge construction practice in the MS Sibaldone,
Still complicated.
Query Mail, in the Central European University Annual of Medieval Studies, or Common Pacing, the Dilemmas of Everyday Life, Uncertainty and Friendship Experience in Late Medieval Florence. He is the founder and co-organizer of HICOR, an interdisciplinary research group of historians and computational corpus linguistics at Oxford universities. So give him a warm hand. Welcome.
So thank you very much, Wolf, for the introduction. So in the last years, I have read a lot of tragic episodes in Testimonies. Now, fortunately, I have managed to forget many of them. But there is one episode that I could never forget. This is the story of the little ballerina. Now, I've never shared her story publicly, but today I'm opening this talk with her story.
As we were standing around waiting for our dresses, the SS became very restless, and the broadcaster wanted to distract them. So she told them that she has a talented ballet dancer, and if they wanted to dance, they agreed that they wanted to dance. And as she was dancing, tears ran down her cheeks, for she remembered the times when she was dancing on stage to the applause to an audience and to the pleasure of her parents And now she was dancing in this God-forsaken place, like in some arena. There were only dogs and SS watching her. And we received our dresses. They took this beautiful child with them. And we never expected to see her again, because when they took somebody away, they usually killed them. But they did bring her back 3 days later. And we couldn't even recognize her. She had been raped and she had been tortured. And she was like in a daze. She didn't know that she has to get up in the morning to stand roll call. And if somebody would have been missing, and if they would find her in the bunk, then she would be beaten to death. So I would pick her up and take her between me and my sister. She should stand. And then we would watch over her, that she would get her portion of food. But a few days later, there was a selection. And we luckily again passed that selection. But they took out from that selection 500 girls. We remained half. And one of those girls was this beautiful ballerina. But she tried to run over to our side. And the SS caught her. And with the butts of their rifles, they beat her to death. It takes a long time for somebody to die when you are beaten to death. And all I remember was praying to God that she should die already. And her screams were following me forever. She was screaming to God, she was screaming to her mother. Nobody could help her. And then, when she was dead, they took all the girls to the gas chamber, and they formed like a chain that nobody should be able to run out. And like a chain, in a chain, they escorted them to the gas chambers. And I promised myself then that I shall never forget her.
So who was the little ballerina? When and when was she born? Who were her parents? There are no answers to these questions. What happened to her until her tragic death? This is a question we can answer. Generations of historians have been attempting to reveal what happened to millions of voiceless victims. Today we have a good and accurate historical understanding of what, how, and when perpetrators did. But this historical understanding does not answer how the little ballerina experienced her persecution. There is an enormous gap between the experience of victims and our historical understanding of what happened. Claude Lanzmann put this gap into words. There was an absolute break between the bookish knowledge I had acquired. There was an absolute break between the bookish knowledge I had acquired and what these people, survivors, told me. I understood nothing anymore. Lanzmann is right. No historical accounts of facts can convey the perspectives through which the little ballerina experienced what happened. The gap between our historical understanding of the Shoah and victims' experience leads to a number of questions. So first of all, what is victims' perspective? What is the perspective of the voiceless? Second, how can we recover it from thousands of testimonies? How can we represent it? And finally, why is it crucial to reflect on victims' perspective in an almost post-survivor age? They are the questions I will address in the next 50 minutes. And they are also the main questions of Let Them Speak, the project I work on as the fellow of the center. So this is a digitally born monograph to be submitted to a major university press. It will include my essays on victims' perspective, as well as an anthology of 2,700 English language testimonies of 3 collections. The title and the cover page are both symbolic. On this image, you can see the so-called Martin monument in the Central Jewish Cemetery in Budapest. The monument memorializes the names of 600 Hungarian victims. The title expresses the mission of this edition, giving voice to them and to murder victims of other countries. This means the elaboration of a digital edition that is centered around victims' perspective. Now, as a starting point, I would like to offer a very concrete example of the absolute break that Landsman mentions between victims' experience and our historical understanding. In my own personal memory, there is an episode I have often heard from survivors. This is my great-grandfather's crying during March to the Ghetto. I could never grasp the significance and the emotional weight of this experience. Why did survivors keep telling me this episode? Then a month ago, I came to the talk on Armenian genocide by Professor Richard Hovhannisyan. And he mentioned that the moment when one saw her or his parents crying was a key moment from the perspective of victims of Armenian genocide. After this, I ran a search in the testimony transcripts of Let Them Speak. And indeed, the moment when one saw her or his parents crying marked a major emotional turning point from the perspective of victims. For many of them, this moment was much more important than what happened as a matter of fact. To illustrate this point, I have a short extract from a testimony of the Shoah Foundation.
Changes did you observe as Hitler rose to power in 1933? I remember, and I'm not quite sure what this particular date was, but I remember one time seeing my father cry. It was the first time I saw my father cry. And I thought that they were burning books in the room. Later on, Tales of course looked at what was happening. I would say my parents usually dismissed it because it couldn't be. It was a country of great unstable, and it couldn't happen in Germany. And you'll see.
Now, even though seeing parents crying is a key moment from the perspective of many victims, this experience does not feature in our historical understanding of the Shoah. And who knows how many other emotional, mental, and physical experiences relevant for victims exist, and we are not aware of them. Or we are aware of them, but we cannot grasp their significance. It has been often said by survivors, such as Primo Levi or Georges Semplon, that the experience of victim has been marginalized by history. This is understandable. Emotional events relevant from the perspective of victims, are historically intangible and irrelevant. First, we historians like to think in terms of verifiable and true facts. But it is pointless to ask whether her father was actually crying. Second, the fact that parents were crying does not explain anything. It does not contribute to our historical understanding of the Holocaust. By contrast, the historical event of burning books is much more interesting. In short, victims' perspective does not address historical facts. Victims' perspective is this intangible but certainly existing emotional and mental dimension of persecutions. For survivors, the understanding of victims' perspective was natural. For us, we hardly understand it. The question is how to preserve victims' perspective and how to convey it in a post-survivor age. Documenting victims' perspective has been the driving force of many oral history projects. providing researchers and educators with the source material that can help to explore the psychological or emotional milieu of persecutions was behind the so-called Holocaust Survivors Film Project. This small grassroots project in the late 1970s gave birth to the Fortunoff Archive at Yale. It inspired collections such as the Visual History Archive of the Shoah Foundation or the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Let Them Speak contains 2,700 testimonies from these three collections. There are 1,000 testimonies from your collection. There are 1,500 testimonies from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And finally, there are all testimonies recorded by the Holocaust Survivors Film Project. And we all know that these 2,700 interviews encompass the perspective of victims. It is there. But how to identify it and how to represent it? In Let Them Speak, I can browse, read, or listen to hundreds of testimonies. But how to identify moments of emotions and deep experiences, such as seeing one's parents crying in approximately 60 million words? Now, catalog data does not help. Emotions could not be described by means of controlled vocabulary. Not even the Shoah Foundation's index data include emotions. Furthermore, many times interviewees do not get very emotional. They are just telling their story and answering questions. So the affective or this mental dimension often remains in silence. Of course, the careful reading of individual testimonies could help to grasp individual survivors' perspective. But again, how to grasp the perspective of the little ballerina and other voiceless victims? The voiceless is certainly present in testimonies. Survivors do consider themselves as the spokesman of the dead. Nevertheless, they usually mention the dead only in the context of the destruction. Interviewees are mute about the perspective of the voiceless. Many theory-oriented articles and books have been written on victims' perspective, but no practical solution to represent it as a historical source has been given. Of course, films, poems, novels telling about victims' perspective has been made, but that's only fiction. The goal of Let Them Speak is to give a tangible and real shape to victims' perspective. By drawing on thousands of testimonies, I wanted to make victims' perspective accessible to researchers, students, and educators. The recollection of a survivor on her return to Auschwitz in the 90s has helped me to address the problem of recovering victims' perspective from testimonies.
Auschwitz several years ago.
Oops.
When I went back to Auschwitz several years ago, back in '93, I believe, there's a room in Auschwitz where it has all luggage, suitcases. I walked into this room, and the first suitcase that stares at me is Weiss, W-E-I-S-S. That was my maiden name. Do I know if it was ours? No. Would I recognize it? No. Could it have been? Yes.
Just like the suitcases in the Auschwitz Museum could have belonged to anyone who was deported to the camp, there must be experiences that could have been the experience of any victim. They are the pieces of the collective experience, ones that are shared by survivors and murdered victims. The experience and the perspective of the voiceless is accessible only through the pieces of the collective experience. Given a reasonably large collection of testimonies, pieces of the collective experience must recur in testimonies. And recurrence is the key word here. Recurrence establishes a bridge between the collective experience as a qualitative concept as a qualitative concept, and the corpus of testimonies as binary data. To discover the perspective of the voiceless, I wanted to find pieces of the collective experience. I wanted to find recurring experiences in the 2,700 testimonies. But there are potentially thousands of similar episodes in testimonies. What I have earlier said about victims' perspective has helped me to set a distinct focus. I decided to focus on emotional, mental, and physical experiences. In more concrete terms, my computational goal has been to identify textual contexts describing recurring physical and emotional experiences in testimonies. Let me show you an example. These sentences all mean the same thing. They describe the same recurring experience that any victim was likely to face. Likeliness is the key word here. We don't know what the little ballerina experienced as a matter of fact. But through the pieces of the collective experience, we can reconstruct what she was likely to experience. The computational problem is how to find sentences or chunks of text expressing the same thing. It is true that these sentences convey the same message, but they use very different vocabulary and structure. And actually, computationally, it is a very difficult task to find sentences or texts meaning the same thing. There is no ready-made algorithm to resolve this problem. So what I did is putting together different methods. And step by step, I managed to identify recurring experiences in testimonies, ones that are the pieces of the collective experience. Now, this led to problems of representation. How to represent recurrent experiences in testimonies as pieces of the collective experience. How to represent them without simplifying and homogenizing them. Finally, how to let them speak. How to let victims speak up for themselves. Pieces of the collective experience can be told only by survivors. What inspired me when I addressed the problem of representation was actually the way a survivor remembered about his past.
And so later in the year, of course, the November pogrom took place. What is your memory of that in Oberwesel?
I had forgotten it for many years. And then one day I was preparing a talk, which was on my inauguration as president of the college. And I showed the talk to my son, and he said, you know, this is a nice talk, but there's nothing human here. Don't you remember anything that motivated you? Then suddenly a memory came back to me of the Kristallnacht. And then I pieced it together. Doors and windows, and no one actually entered that.
Sorry.
And then I pieced it together because it started the night before, and there was beating on our doors and windows, and no one actually entering the house. But it was a very frightening thing that woke me up. And the following morning, we all then slept together in the living room. And the following morning, my grandfather took me down to the Scharplatz, which is the place where the town gate had been originally, and where the synagogue was located. There was a brook in front of the synagogue at the time, and in the brook there was floating fragments of the prayer books and the Torah scrolls, hacked to pieces, and everyone inside the synagogue, which was completely tarred black. Now, many of the synagogues were destroyed at Kristallnacht through burning. This synagogue, they couldn't burn because it was a triplex house with non-Jews living on either side. So you couldn't burn it, just the synagogue. So they defaced the synagogue, tore it apart inside. And so my grandfather, I remember wading into the library and pulling out of it the scraps of the Torah that had been hacked to pieces and the prayer books, and gave them to me, and he said, "Here, take these," and I clutched them. I remember having this batch of wet parchment, and he said, "One day we'll put the pieces back together again." And of course, that one day was never to be.
So your work has been an expression, all aspects of your work has been an expression of your experience as a survivor.
Well, it's my grandfather's words, you see, piecing together those scraps of parchment of Torah that were cut asunder, realigning the fragments to make them into a whole. I think that's been my motivating spirit and vision.
So I also wanted to represent the pieces of the collective experience as fragments. I adopted the concept of testimonial fragments from philology of ancient history. Now let me show you how pieces of the collective experience are represented as testimonial fragments. So for instance, let's see that. We can go actually to here. So here you see what we saw before as part of the text. So now they all became fragments, very short text expressing a common experience. Now for today, I have printed some of these fragments, and I would like you to do the following exercise. The fragments are here. Some fragments are here in this.
Should I?
Yeah. Yeah, they're here. So you can just choose any of them. It's not important. Okay, so I'm giving you 2 minutes, and please engage with these fragments as experiences that the little ballerina was very likely to face. Okay. Now, some would claim that these fragments are only pieces of memory. They are just belatedly constructed and mediated pieces of narratives. They have nothing to do with the past as it was. Nevertheless, memory does not construct the past. Memory conveys the pieces of the past. It is true that it keeps these pieces as elements of a narrative. I therefore denarrativized and decontextualized testimonial fragments. I removed all contextual details, and I detach them from the original narrative in which they appear. Testimonial fragments are meant to be beyond any individual narrative, memory, or post-war discourse. They are designed to be always incomplete and fragmentary windows to the past. And they are meant to unlock subjective realities in which millions lived. But what is giving the authenticity of a testimonial fragment? First of all, the recurrence in testimonies. The fact that they are shared by many victims. Second, the very voice of a survivor. Okay, sorry. So, sorry, the internet doesn't seem to be working. But the idea is that if you, in the addition, if you click on a fragment, you can go out, you can go back to the original interview where the fragment is coming from. So you might, of course, say that these fragments describe obvious things. There is nothing surprising in them. Again, films, novels, and other forms of art have already presented these experiences. But that's, again, only fiction. And one way to represent them as historical sources is to let survivors speak and tell it. This is in the heart of Let Them Speak as an approach to testimonies and generally to the Holocaust. Let Them Speak is an approach that on the one hand aims to present victims' perspective by making survivors speak up. Where and how a given piece of the collective experience happened. Most importantly, what and how victims felt about it. By clicking on any fragment, the reader can read and listen to a given fragment in its original context. Sure, he can explore the variety of ways a given experience could actually take shape. It's important to emphasize that a testimonial fragment is always a group of fragments. I cannot single out one fragment to represent an entire experience. That would homogenize and simplify the experience. The goal is to let fragments complement each other and to convey a heterogeneous view of a given piece of the collective experience. Fragments are also meant to break silence. Many times, for instance, we don't hear that children are crying when they are taken away from their parents. Now, to summarize my points, which I put on this side, testimonial fragments are meant to represent the pieces of the collective experience. Interviews behind fragments are the unique and individual manifestation of these pieces. The digital technology enables an effortless oscillation between the collective and the individual. Of course, Let Them Speak cannot be exhaustive. I aim to identify 1,000 testimonial fragments in 8 experience domains. And I'm hoping that future scholarship will continue to identify further testimonial fragments with different themes in an even larger data set. Okay, we have that. Now, publication of fragments along with interviews is only one half of Let Them Speak as a data edition. A number of exploratory tools are being designed with the purpose of giving access to emotional experiences connecting testimonies. Today, I will show you how a sophisticated search engine is helping to explore victims' perspective and unlock texts. Let's return to the example of parents crying. How do I find these moments in testimonies? Now, if I just write a word like mother crying, I get 34 results. And clearly, there must be much, much more examples of this. So, or what about this? My mother was crying again. another 63 results, and so on. So there must be a way to find and to match patterns in the text. And Let Them Speak is built on a corpus engine, and it is actually available as a linguistic resource. So we can use a pattern matching language to fine-tune our searches. So let's see this first pattern, what I put here. So now I inserted this here, which means that between father and crying, there can be 10 words, which can be anything. So let's see what's, OK. So we already find things like, my father started crying, for instance, which we wouldn't find if we typed like, my father was crying. But the problem with this is that crying is a gerund form, and why do we expect that people use the gerund form like crying? You could use cried or cry in present and so on. So for this, we can insert and search by using the dictionary form of each word, which we call in linguistics, which we call lemma. Because for instance, we would like to find fathers were crying. How do we find fathers were crying if we look for father? So the solution is to look for not for father or fathers, but to look for any word, the dictionary form of which is father. And of course, we would like to include synonyms as well, like dad, daddy, and so on. And then the lemma cried. So this will find crying and cried. So let's see what's coming out here. OK, so not bad. It's we got better and better results. OK. So what about including then mother, mom, and so on? So opening it even better, which is here. So here I also have, I added the lemma mother, I added the lemma parent, and so on. Now you can see that we have approximately 1,000 results. Of course, there can be duplicate. So it means that in one third of the interviews, there is mentioning parents crying. But we have some things here when crying does not refer to the father, but the victim is crying, the interview is crying. So we would like to exclude them, and I don't want to do that here. So I wrote even a more complicated pattern in which I said that between cry and word there can be any word, but there cannot be parenthesis, which is signing what we call meta event. Oops. So let's see what's coming out of here. So it's taking a few seconds. OK, here we are, and then we don't have any more. This is really annoying. It's coming back. OK, so now we don't have any more the ones where we had the parentheses, the mother cried, and so on. But of course, it's a very interesting thing to find those moments when a victim is talking about the crying of the parents, and he or she himself is crying at the moment, which is, again, a very difficult thing to find. But I wrote up a pattern to do that. Query OK, here we are. So we see that, I remember, like today, my father was crying, and then there is a sobbing and pauses for a few seconds, and so on. OK. OK, how much time do I still have? I'm wondering. 10 minutes. Okay, then let's jump to the conclusion, because I've prepared other things, but I would like, let's jump to the conclusion after this. So, in my conclusion, I'm again turning back to my own personal memory. I have a large collection of letters during persecutions. And in this collection, there is a farewell letter with a last wish. Think of us every now and again who had to suffer for being born. In Testimonies, there are hundreds of similar messages from the voiceless. They ask to be remembered. Nevertheless, historical knowledge inevitably conveys a dehumanized memory of them. Survivors did put this into words.
When my son went to a religious school, he was taught about Holocaust. Then he got a lot of statistics and he got a lot of gory stories. In turn, he positively off. And I can't understand that too. It would turn me off too, because after a while, you got desensitized rather than sensitized to it. After you see so many pictures, even the most horrid pictures, somehow those people become like historical objects, like mummies. And there is something emotional lost there.
So the farewell letter in my collection was written to a daughter who survived the war. Until the death of the daughter, there was someone to remember about this mother as a human and not as a dehumanized victim. However, sooner or later, this farewell letter will disappear in an archive. For future generations, she will be again only a number, one of the 6 millions. Her life will be accounted as a victim and remembered through the deeds of persecutors. Deported to and gassed in Auschwitz. Survivors were aware of this.
You feel that this testimony today is a memorial for your family?
That's right. Remember the names. Who's going to remember the names? Mandela's going to keep tradition. She'll remember the names, that's all.
What are the names? You want to close by mentioning the names of your family, your parents, your brothers, your
Yeah.
sisters?
This is the memory. Who's else going to remember? Nobody.
What are the
So today our thought about the 6 million victims is very much influenced by the concept of dehumanization. Many survivors frame their past as a state when they were not humans anymore. But there are other voices as well, ones that tell the contrary. Were they humans, or were they so much dehumanized that they were not humans anymore? I don't know this, and I will never know. But there is one thing I know. They deserve to be remembered as humans and not as dehumanized puppets or emotionless mummies, as the survivor said, in the hands of perpetrators. There is a moral imperative to humanize the experience of the voiceless victim. And I think that we can humanize their experience by revealing and presenting the emotional, mental, and physical experiences that they were likely to go through. I opened this talk with the story of the ballerina told by Cecil Klein-Pollack. And I'm finishing this talk by quoting a poem by Cecil Klein-Pollack.
The relief I would get when I would be very depressed and would think of what happened to my family, that I memorialize them in my poems. And I will have to read you this poem I wrote in this beautiful resort place. Instead of enjoying it, this is how I felt, and this is what I wrote. out of the ashes. From our ashes we'll rise up and cry out to the world. Our ashes will remind you of our gruesome
Sorry.
past. We will fill you poor and will think of what happened to my family, that I memorialize them in my poems. And I will have to read you this poem I wrote in this beautiful resort place. Instead of enjoying it, this is how I felt what I wrote. Out of the ashes. From our ashes we'll rise up and cry out to the world. On our ashes you are treading and make you face your guilt. Our ashes will remind you of our gruesome past. We will fill your pores with ashes and refuse to let you rest. Our bones will make your earth swell. Of our tortures every blow. By your children you will be called to task. Why did you kill them? They will ask. Your children will bear the shame. You, the parents, they will blame. We will tell them that we were human too. We laughed and laughed like you, and rejoiced with our children and being a proud Jew. For this.
So thank you very much for your attention. And I would like to thank the Shoah Foundation for the Postdoctoral Fellowship Award. Thank you.
So, floor is open for questions or comments. So maybe then just I
have a question. I'm just curious. You said you had 8 experiences that you were looking through.
Yeah.
Could you just tell us a bit more about what those 8 were and how this came about?
So these are the 8 experiences I'm specifically interested in. So I think from here, now I haven't uploaded fragments, that's a process. So there are some experiences that are quite well studied, and there have been papers and studies on it, so we feel shame and guilt. There are experience domains about which we don't know anything, like yell, scream, and things like that. Fear is another experience domain that we have a kind of, I think we have a limited understanding of what were the major fears of people and things like that. So they are the 8 domains.
So what is the bottom one?
Shaking, physically shaking. Shaking is a word that, so these are not only these words, but they're including their synonyms. They are the words that are extremely frequent in testimonies, very, very frequent. So for instance, one of the things that is really surprising, not surprising actually, is run. I've never read any paper on running. Running is a fundamental experience for victims. It's not very surprising actually if you start to think about it. So if you think, for instance, now there isn't anything behind it. A key recurring experience is running to the forest. For instance, running away, running in the camp. That was like a horrific experience that you couldn't stop for a minute, but you had to run all the time. Old people had to run. They were rushed, and so on. So running I find running is one of the most interesting experience domains, which is never heard, or it does not really feature in our history of the Shoah. But we could talk about nakedness. That's another thing that's not there. There are no papers on that. Even though, again, it's one of the most fundamental experience. And so on. So.
Is there like humiliation then?
What's that?
Humiliation.
So that's coming under, I think, shame. So this is actually behind them. There are synonyms. So it's not like individual words, but they are synonym sets. So for instance, yell includes a lot of things. Scream. I don't even remember what else there are under yell. So scream and cry. No, cry is not there. Yeah, I don't remember what kind of synonyms I extracted for screaming, but there is a lot of synonyms for that. Yep.
So how do you extract these different fragmental collections? Because I was thinking about what is the level of abstraction of the collective or recurrent fragments? Is it nakedness, for example? The fragments we saw, they are all referred to massacres, kind of on shootings.
Right.
There could be also nakedness, for example, in front of the gas chamber. And so,
Yeah.
Are you selecting those, or is your search engine putting them together?
No.
What is the process?
So the process is first I work with verbs. So first I'm looking at those verbs that are occurring about the median frequency. So there is a median value. Where is the middle? So everything that is about the median, the verbs. Then I have a list of verbs that are occurring in more testimonies than so the median is computed in a different way. But so let's say they're occurring about the median, which is around 300 testimonies actually. It's quite low, the median. So I have these verbs, and then I start to look at the synonyms of verbs. So there is a way to compute the synonyms of verbs from the data. And then I have synonym sets. Okay, so I have a synonym set for all type of verb. So I have the synonym set, and then I extract all occurrences of a synonym set. So for instance, we can just I can show you what I mean. So I say here, like, okay, so this is 4,400, 400, and then if we include everything, all the synonyms, we will have 10,000 occurrences. And then all the occurrences are extracted, and then something is called topic modeling is run over the occurrences, which groups them into sets of, into keyword groups, and extracts the co-occurring keywords from them. So one co-occurring keyword could be like, I'm just making up, I don't know by heart, like scream, water, train. And then it's easy to put that together. Or fear, you would see fear, father, parents. This is another topic that is in the occurrences. And then once you have them, then I start to edit them. So there is of course an editing process. This is not an automatic thing, because the problem is that computers are dumb. They're just stupid. So if you have ever talked to this automatic customer line service, you can answer only with yes and no questions. The reason is that because computers don't understand if two sentences mean the same thing. And that's the reason why Pinker misunderstands many things, as we know. Because we have difficulties of identifying the meaning of a longer sequence. So the workaround is to use keywords, keyword groups, and group texts according to keywords. Is it making sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm happy with that. There's no other. Oh, yeah.
So I can see that you also have instructions here. So how do you imagine Lebensspeak being used, and what would be intended audiences for it? Would it be historians, school kids?
I think I think researchers, school kids, and so on. So this is I'm very much hoping this will be open to everyone and it will be a peer-reviewed academic publication. I don't want to tell which university press, this is going to, because still too early, but one of the major university presses that publishes digitally born objects will hopefully publish it, and then it will be available to anyone.
And would it be more user-friendly?
Yeah, so that's at Yale. Folks are working on that. So this is a prototype, and yes, it will be much more user-friendly. So what we can do actually at this point is it's more interesting to go back to another thing. So for instance, I'll come back here to the search, and now I can choose the collection. I can choose the ghetto where a person was, the camps, the interviews names is there, and then there is also the recording year, and gender, of course. We have gender, so we have male and then female here. So metadata is also included here, and it can be filtered in terms of metadata. Yep.
How did you choose which testimonies to include here? Because there are 2,700 from 3 different archives, right? Is it a random sample of testimonies from each? How do you know that the testimonies here are representative of the average experience or a very common experience in each archive?
Okay, so the answer is that it was no Wunschkonzert. So it wasn't a wish. It wasn't my decision. I worked with what I get. I couldn't choose. This is what I got from the Shoah Foundation. I didn't get anything else. That's it. And then these 1,500 testimonies what I got from the USHMM. The testimonies that are more or less homogeneous is the Fortunoff, because they are all from the Holocaust Survivors Film Project, which is I think one of the most important collection. This 170 testimonies, because they were the first, actually, one of the first testimonies to be recorded. That was the first testimony project. It was a very fresh experience. So that's a very different thing. And then they are all, this 173 from the Fortunoff Archive, they're all part of the Survivors Film Project by Dori Laub and yeah, mainly Dori Laub created that project, and Professor Hartman, of course. Yeah.
I have one more question. So I can see that you put a lot of emphasis on emotion, and I'm thinking about VAJ, and in the current version of the Visual History Archive, of course, you're not able to search for emotional cues or nonverbal cues. That's not indexed. However, that's going to be in our transcripts, so which already is in those that we do have. So how is this different from an average transcript search? What's the additional value of what you built here in relation to an average transcript search that you would have?
So first, yeah. So first of all, the corpus engine in which it's sitting. So this pattern matching. You can do very, very complex things with that. With simple search, you cannot do. So you wouldn't, with a simple search, you would be never able to find these things here, never. So if you search for father and cry, you would get like, you wouldn't be able to define distances between words, for instance. So like I do. Where is it? So this is one thing that's something that you cannot do. You cannot search for lemmas, for instance, and things like that. So but that's that search. As to the emotions, it means the emotions will be mainly accessible through the testimonial fragments, which will be ready-made, and users can browse them and can see them. Whereas if you just like, the problem with this is that it's a lot. It's 1,000. So and then there are also bad examples, like when there is no real crying and things like that. So I think that the fact that the fragments are that adds a lot to to find emotions and things like that. And then the other thing is that which I find a very important thing, that this is really a bottom-up method. So it's everything that is here is coming from the text itself. It's not coming from a top-down approach where you define a set of keywords and then you impose them on the text. So that's
So this is actually a good segue into my question, because I stumbled what you said. At some point you said, what I do is recovering victims' perspectives from testimonies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bold claim, I have to say. So
Mm-hmm.
can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to find those key turning points, emotional turning points that were important for victims. So for instance, seeing your father crying, or women feeling embarrassed at certain point, or certain things like fear of something, fear to die, fear of your parents, and so on. And I think just by reading one testimony, or two testimonies, or three testimonies, you wouldn't necessarily realize that. So you have to have like a kind of visible format of all this, because otherwise you don't understand the importance of it. If you just read it, or if you read like the testimony we've seen here about the Kristallnacht, no? Historian would just like ignore it. Like, father was crying. Na gut, who cares? Much more. And by contrast, I'm trying to put into forefront all these kind of emotional events and really to put them into the center. And by contrast, when you work with keywords, not necessarily the index data, but keywords in the Library of coming from Library of Congress and so on, they're all organized according to, let's say, as survivors say, cold historical facts. Liquidation of the ghetto, and so on. And this will be, so the fragments organize testimonies in a different way. So is it making sense?
Yeah,
Or?
yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
How do you define like a turning point in the testimony? Like, is it a turning point within that testimony or within that person's life?
Well, I think turning point is coming from the collective experience. It's not like an individual person's thing, but it's turning point is coming from the for me from the fact that it is shared by many people. So, for instance, the fear for parents. But of course, turning point is maybe it's not the best word because these experiences are not like not necessarily very concrete. So it's not a fear for parents was a longer thing. Of course, it took for years and years. But for instance, a turning point is, I think, when one first time in his life sees another person being beaten to death. That's an emotional turning point. Just the moment of seeing it, for instance. But yeah, I think turning point is maybe not necessarily the best word.
Maybe it's a cathartic point or something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because turning point is so kind of turning back or turning to a certain direction.
Yeah, I recognize that.
And I was struck by how you grouped the fragments, and I found this really compelling to see these different kind of fragments together as a group. I found this really, it's very powerful, I have to say.
Oops.
Then that you can actually go back to the individual experience. Because I was thinking about this, where are they coming from? They seem so similar, but they are probably in very different places.
Right. They are very different places, and so and I think this kind of testimony excerpts have. This is not an entirely new thing. So I mean, you in the Shoah Foundation use excerpts, in this digital world, there are excerpts from testimonies, short texts. They are there, but it's not a kind of. I think there hasn't been any kind of systematic way of finding these excerpts and really putting them together. And then the other idea behind Fragments is to establishing reading path. So this is you can read them again in the context, and then the group of fragments is opening different reading experiences and show them show the same experience from different angles. And of course, once one person finds them, and then it's possible to say, okay, hey, because there are only 5, so this is a selection, this is an anthology, it's not like to be all, but one could write, okay, Screaming and Water, and then start to try to find other instances, less edited instances here. So yeah.
But you also mix the experiences or the memory of the experiences with kind of post-event memories.
Right.
Because, for example, you make screaming, somebody is yelling at them in the concentration camp or at the massacre site. But then you also have, in the same fragment group, you have the people who scream at night waking up.
Right. So actually, fragments are not only meant to stand for the voiceless, but generally for everyone, for all victims who had similar experiences, not only in the camps, but later. And then these people who never shared this experience, or these people who never gave any interview, who never talked about it. So it's not only about the voiceless, of course. But I did not want to include and then the other thing is, I think it's difficult to define what we mean by the voiceless, because there are people who died 10 days after the end of the war, and then they were living in hiding, and they could have nightmares. Or what's the other one? There is this term, shame. So there is this thing. Yeah. No, I wanted to see another one. So the survivor's guilt, the guilt feeling, and what's his name? Larry Langer, Professor Langer was really upset when he saw this. He was really, really upset. He said that, but this is the invention of the psychiatrist. But if you start to think about it, guilt is present in testimonies not only in the context of the survivor's guilt, but people were forced to make choices. So guilt was there throughout the entire time. When someone had to leave, and someone didn't give a piece of biscuit to her or his sister, and then so there isn't only the survivor's guilt as such. Guilt is again a very, very fundamental emotional experience that was present I think throughout persecutions.
Have you found differences between the collections that are included here in terms of the language that appears commonly? So knowing that interviewers had different interview styles, or maybe a different set of questions that focused more on the psychological experience of the survivor, or trying to pinpoint the historical facts that occurred, do you think that where the testimonies are coming from and the way that they were produced has anything to do with what experiences are reflected?
Yeah, I think I'm sure that it is reduced. It is Noah Schenker who wrote a big book on this, how institutional practices shape memory, but computationally to find these differences, it's really difficult. And then the other problem is that whatever you find is maybe it's statistically not relevant. So that's the problem. You find something and then it seems to be like, okay, there is a pattern, but then when you look at like the confidence scores and statistics, and then they are very low. So it's it would be good to have it, but I'm a bit skeptic about that, whether it's possible and how it is possible. But actually, so this is an important thing, that here in the methodology part, so here I'm describing each data set, where it's coming from and things like that. And for instance, one thing that I'm looking at, and this is something I wanted to speak about, but I just jumped it because I didn't want to take time of people. Yeah. So I don't know how this will. So I don't know how this will look like, for instance, for the Shoah Foundation. So what is this plot about? So I wanted to find those interviews where the interviewees cannot speak fluently. She or he needs to be asked a lot of questions. And I also wanted to find those interviews where someone is answering in very lengthy, very long monologues. So how do you find them? There is no catalog data for that. So what is here? This is the number of words. This is the number of segments in the interview, so number of questions and answers. And this is what we expect. So for instance, if you have 20,000 words, we expect that there will be 400 segments. But then there are the outliers. This is one outlier and this is another outlier. So this is HVT 74. And if we go back to the interview, to HVT 74, here we are. See that? Here we are. Now, by contrast, and it actually turns out that in this interview, the problem was that she couldn't speak English, or her English was not good enough, so half of it is in German. But of course, I didn't know that, and no one knew that there is that this is an interview where there are many questions. So then by contrast, if we come back to here, so HVT 42, very long answers. Very, very long answers. This is what we can expect. And let's go to HVT 42. Here we are. Yes, very long answers. Much longer we would expect things. So, okay, so this is about the Fortunoff Archive. But so I'm very much interested in how this plot will look like for the Shoah Foundation, how dispersed the data is. Because if we will see that everything is close to the regression line, it means that, that there was a very strict structure. And even if someone wanted to talk very long, he or she was interrupted at some point. So, sorry, yeah.
The fact that they utilized 2 interviewers at a time of the Fortunoff Archive.
Sorry?
They at times had 2 interviewers.
Yes.
Interviewing the same survivor.
Yes.
Does that make a difference?
Yes. So for instance here, this is 2 interviewers and 2 interviewees. This is why there are many questions, which are here, up here actually, here. So it will be interesting to see the same plot for the Shoah Foundation, and to see how this. It will be interesting to see the regression line, slope, and things like that. And so the goal is really to, when I'm saying that I'm presenting the data, is to finding anomalies, finding exceptions in the collection, finding strange things about which we don't know. I mean, I think there is no way to find out in the Shoah Foundation's archive, in the Visual History Archive, which interviews are very like set of short monologues. You don't know where they are. Yeah.
So, since you mentioned Noroshenka and also kind of the question with the institutional setting is supposed to influence the interviews. So I'm curious, interesting is when you have these transcripts now, and you look for psychological effects, emotional experiences, one would suppose that the Fortunoff interviews, since they are done especially focusing on this, should be much more kind of giving you much more material than, for example, the Holocaust or the Shoah Foundation interviews. Is this really true? Or is actually from your kind of now data mining, it's actually not so much. You get actually similar experiences from all these different sets of interviews.
So this is something I cannot answer at this point. So there's more data analysis needed. But it's very difficult because, again, here there are 170 from the Fortunoff, 1,000 from the Shoah Foundation. It's very difficult to compare them. Because there are 5 times more from the Shoah Foundation. And then the solution is to get a representative sample from this 1,000, a representative sample from the Fortunoff, and then compare them. But it's not something very easy, I think, to do. But it would be an interesting research question to find out whether there is any difference there.
Can you also do this over like so the institution, but also like years in which the interviews are given, or are they all just very close together?
No, yeah. Oh, yeah. So now this is what I'm doing. I don't have the plot here, but so for instance, for the Fortunoff Archive, I'm looking at the years, so dispersion of years when they were made. No, not. I mean, in the case of the Fortunoff Archive, it's easy because they're all from 78, 79, 80. But for instance, I'm looking at the dispersion of the age of interviewees, for instance, and here actually on the. So here you can look at the year if you are specifically interested in a given year. So now here are only those interviews that were made between 83 and 95. And then we can add like, I don't know, Shoah Foundation. This is an interesting, why is that? Oh, no, because it's, so the Shoah Foundation is 94 and 95. So they are still the very early interviews. I didn't know that, but they are very early, actually, here. So, yep, so that's it.
So can you search them with your engine, also the years by these patterns?
Yes, yeah, of course. That's a part here, so. And then I can search for them.
Okay. So you can list it. Okay.
Yeah, so I can with that, I can facet it in this way. And then like I can say male and so on, and camp name and so this is not yet perfect. We still need to work.
But there's a lot of potential for the future, I think, because we talked a lot about how narrative changes over time, and then you can see by data mining if this is really also true. Yes.
That's not it's not something I do. I don't believe in that, but some people like it and they can do it.
Yeah.
But it's again like how narrative changes. This is not there is no such thing as representative sample. So the problem with that is that So I can find some patterns in this data, and then I get another 10,000 interviews, and then that can blow up my entire statistic and all my conclusions. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Very, very dangerous.
I think as a digital humanist, you are very cautious because of the data. I understand this, but I think it might in the future lead to interesting questions.
Yeah, I mean,
the more you integrate, the more transcripts, then actually you can actually address certain questions there.
well, of course, and then there is also the problem that we, for instance, talked a lot about that. So there is this testimony, and what about highlighting the keywords and putting here? So for instance, we could find out if she was, for instance, hypersensitive, sorry, he was hypersensitive against acoustic experiences. We could easily highlight here the overused terms, the terms that are there much more frequently than we would expect, and so on. The question is that is it ethical? Can we do that? I think we cannot. I think it's a very rude thing to do, because he never gave his consent to this. He never told that okay, you can extract and you can start to speculate on my words. And I think that's very problematic to do. But it would be theoretically possible to find those nouns that are overused by someone. If someone is frequently crying, we could find like this in a minute. Who are the interviewees? Who are those interviewees who cry the most? Would we like to find that? No. Sorry. Would we like to tell it to the readers that he is the person who cried the most? It's not nice. There's a privacy.
What would cause them to cry the most? Why?
Or why? Yeah. I mean, that's more interesting, I think. But I really think that all these computational methods can be used only at the level of collective experience. I have serious problems when they are used to study individual victims. Like, he cried more. He cried the most. He's the person who is always hearing screaming. Very problematic. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.